Welcome to That Backyard Property Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Killiner, and I'm a father, a husband, and a mortgage broker. Our goal is to inspire, educate, and empower people through property. Whether you're a first home buyer, whether you're looking to upgrade or downsize or invest in property, then we're here to help you. Each week, we'll have a special guest that's an expert in their field, and they'll guide us through all of your questions that you might have, plus a lot of other information. So let's do this. Welcome back to another episode of Backyard Property. Today we have Rowan Powell. Very excited. Probably, if not the best buyer's agent in WA, and no doubt one of the best in the country, we'll call it. First person on the podcast with a wiki page. Welcome to the pod, Rowan.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I don't know if the wiki page has much information on it, but we'll take it.
I think it had your height on there, and that's about it.
Yeah, that's about as far as it goes, I think.
Yeah. I'm not even too sure if it was yours, but anyway, I thought it was a good addition.
You sure it wasn't Rowan Powell, the West Indies opening bat? But look, it is what it is.
That was the second one that I saw.
Yeah, it was.
So thanks for coming on. It's really exciting. We've obviously connected rather recently and share a lot of the same values and ideas, and it's pretty cool to sit down and have a chat.
No, mate, look, I actually really look forward to it. It's not often you get to meet like-minded people in this industry, and I think that's probably one of the biggest things is everyone likes to do it themselves, but then once you start to reach out and you connect with fellow people, you obviously learn a lot, but it's also nice to have a voice of reasoning at times as well.
Well, it's lonely sometimes as a business owner. You kind of don't really know where to turn to because a lot of the stuff just ends up falling on your lap.
Yeah, and I think I literally had this conversation this morning. When you're going through business and you don't own it, right? You're so used to looking up and sideways, and then it gets to a point in time where you are the up. Yeah. And then you go, where do I look to from here? Is it podcasts? Is it books? Is it trying to become 1% better? But you can't go back down at times because you're like, okay, everything's coming to me. We're the buck ends. So it's always an interesting point where you get to it and you go, wow, it's upon reflection. You go yes, I am the end of it.
Yeah.
But sometimes it is nice to be able to talk through things or have a conversation about stuff that goes on that probably a lot of people might not ever see as well.
Yeah, and it's hard if you haven't walked the shoes or been involved in something like that. It's hard to understand. And
also a lot of people that get to that point, they also don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So you're trying to trial and error, and you're trying to figure out how am I going to get better? How do I become more efficient in my processes? All these other the little things that make up running a good business.
Yeah.
It's not like, okay, here's the blueprint, copy this. It's like, okay, there's so many different formulas and so much that changes over time.
Yeah.
So much to learn and also do your day job at the same time. So there's so many elements that probably go into it that aren't really spoken about.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of business owners probably don't speak to one another too much about it.
Yeah, because I guess there's vulnerability in it. It's quite funny because on reflection, I know you don't have kids yet, but not that you will if that's the case. But being a parent and you go into this whole parenting journey and you have no idea what you're doing. You literally just became a parent because there's a child there. You haven't changed as a person, and so I found it quite similar to being a business owner, where you're in this role now. You go, well, I don't even know what I'm doing now because I haven't done it before. Yeah. So you're kind of in this really weird universe.
And that's how I kind of envision it. The amount of people that I speak to that I have had children and are about to. And even the day that the child gets delivered, and I'm like, how's it feel to be a father? And he's like, it feels exactly the same as it did yesterday. It's just the fact that I now have a child. Yeah. So, and he's like, I've got greater responsibility, and that's probably where it starts, and it's going to continue to go. And I think that pretty much sums up running a business or owning the business in particular.
Absolutely. I better caveat that because my wife will listen. Very different from a female's perspective after labour. There's some big changes on that end, but yeah, from a male's perspective.
I think we'll leave it at that, Ross. Yeah. Might have a couple of complaints pretty quickly on.
Yeah. So in terms of moving on, I love asking this as the first question, really, and it's take me back to your first memories of a home? Or if I was to mention the word home, what do you think of it? Whether it's your first family home or your first property that you bought, talk to me. What's home mean to you?
Home's an interesting one for me. Obviously, I grew up in the country and I moved around. So my mum was a teacher, dad was a boiler maker. So we probably didn't have home until I moved to Broome. So we started off in Bunbury to Kalgoorlie to Noosa and back, and then to Broome, and lived there for most of my life. So I moved around and lived in a lot of houses, and it's something I do bring up with my clients is that home, yes, it can be the four walls, but it's like the environment that you're creating yourself, and it's something that you got to love. Like, so for me, when I have that aspiration of what a home is, it's something that I love, and when I think about that, it's back home to Broome and those good fond memories of being with my family.
What are the memories like? What's the backyard cricket?
I've
Walking the
obviously.
streets?
I'll probably have to give a shout out to my brother here because he's 5. I'm the youngest, and he's 5 years older than me. So he's probably bowling me chin music since I was a kid, and probably helped me become the professional athlete that I am now. But a lot of backyard, playing in the street, like the Australian dream. Like if you were to picture the Australian dream, like playing cricket on the front of the drive, and there's a bit of bitumen, so there's a bit of movement in the wicket, little things like that.
Tennis balls taped up.
Yeah, really, really, like 16 is a good score in the backyard. So little things like that, that's probably what drives home for me. And then obviously now that I've moved to Perth and created my career, it's probably like the community you're involved in, and just being just being able to be yourself. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah. Is there, do you try and replicate that feeling of home in your current home? Like, is that something that you find easy to do, or are you kind of always reminiscing about those fond memories?
I think you just got to be comfortable in your surroundings. Like, anyone can make anything feel homely. Like, it's probably the people you surround yourself with or the things you enjoy to make sure you're still doing it in the place. And yeah, look, there's always times I have nostalgia about going back into Broome and doing those things, but then a lot of the time it's like being present and having perspective of what I enjoy, and because it changes over time, and whether that's quality time with your partner, just some time to yourself, little things that you go, well, this is what I love, and obviously it's forever changing as well.
So then we touched on it earlier, and I guess this is probably where you bring in that sense of home, because you've fairly recently started your own business, and no doubt helping people buy their own family homes is a bit of that nostalgia coming up for you when you're talking to them about what they create in their home. Talk to me. What's the business? What's the background?
Well, in regards to my business, so obviously being a buyer's agent, obviously trying to help facilitate people get into the market, purchase their property, whether it's their first one or their 10th one. But just being able to give that advice and probably market specialisation is something I really pride myself on, and our company as well. But it's for everyone. So it's like, no matter if you're buying for a mum and dad or a first-time home buyer, or someone that's maybe lived in City Beach for 30 years and had their kids' engagements and weddings there, and they're trying to downsize, like you really need to have that emotional element and understand what home is, because you're trying to replicate that in another property each time, and you really need to be patient and understanding, but also work in their best interest, because I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of people are struggling with when they're trying to buy properties. They second guess themselves, or they're probably like, it's not something everyone grows up knowing what to do. And I think it's probably the most discussed around a table, no matter like any family setting. Properties are first and foremost always talked about, but really you might have one person that's bought one property and they think they're an expert, whereas we're buying hundreds, thousands. So then you start to facilitate that, but each transaction still needs to hold an importance, because it's still the home element, and it's not just that investment level. It's, well, you've got to make sure that your client's happy for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So you really need to make sure that you're listening to their needs. Yeah.
And so if we're then going, well, if anyone was going, well, what is a buyer's agent? What would be the simplified version of what you actually do?
The simplified version is just pretty much being your soundboard and making sure no mistakes happen, but being confident in the process. I know that's a pretty long-winded, but it's really hard to kind of narrow down exactly what it is. It's representing a buyer's best interest is the biggest one.
And helping them find.
Helping them find their property, understand where it is for value, especially in the market that we're in at the moment, which I think we'll probably touch on a bit later. And just give them confidence. I think that's the biggest thing that you see a lot of people struggle with, is just the confidence of being like, okay, let's pull the trigger. Yeah. It's like you with brokering as well. Sometimes people just need to have the confirmation of the numbers for them to make sense. So it's really about just listening to them and trying to interpret that in the way of property.
It's funny you mention that, because it's so true. And the amount of, especially first home buyers, where you sit down with them and they go, all right, don't judge me on this, but I've saved about 60,000. I know it's not much. And you go, that's amazing. Yeah. And you could see the sense of relief go, is it? Like, yeah. And so I guess you get the same thing. We go, yeah, that's like, you don't know what other people don't tell you about behind the curtains. And so you hear these stories and you go, oh, you're doing such a good job.
And I think that's a big thing, not just in property. I think it's in everything, that people compare themselves to others. And everyone's running their own race in their own lane. Like, the way that you go about it's completely different to the way someone else goes about it. And I think that's really important to touch on, because everyone has different timing frames. Everyone has different circumstances that prevent them from doing things. So it's really our job, essentially, like referring, is to be very much a chameleon and understand that you've got to adapt to each person that comes through your door and be like, okay, how can I best represent them? Because each person is different. And if you put a blanket rule over everyone, it becomes pretty dull and mundane pretty quickly, I find. Yeah. So you really got to dive deep into that emotional sense of each person that comes in, because that's the reason why you get repeat clients, and the reason why they enjoy what you do is because you're building rapport with them.
It's a pretty satisfying role you're in.
It is. It's something that I enjoy doing each day. Obviously, you have some days that are harder than others in particular. But I enjoy being able to help people and knowing that I can put my head on the pillow and not have to worry about anything, because I've left all my integrity. I'm honest, and the way people find me as well is that I never have to think twice about that. Yeah. And I know I'm representing their best interest. And that's the most positive thing about this whole experience. And you're the same. When you know that you're working for someone's best interest, it's a completely different story in regards to how they feel and how you feel as well.
Very transparent. Very transparent.
It's the only way to be. Like, over time, when you're doing this business, it's not... As soon as someone starts to lie and manipulate, you've got to backtrack and you've got to remember all that stuff. Yeah. Like, and it's not the way to live, let alone run a business. You'd rather just have a stressless environment, make sure everything you say you're genuine with, and it's a lot easier to operate that way.
Yeah, because you don't have to try and remember what you said before, because it was the same thing.
It's exactly the same thing. And if you believe in it and you believe what you do, it's so much easier to try and convey that to a potential client. But then even that client probably becomes more than just a client over that time, because they rely on me maybe for everything in regard to property, but you start getting invited to other things and you become a part of their life and a part of their community, and that's probably the biggest positive out of it all.
Yeah, you know you're doing something right. So when did you move into the buyer's agency space? Like, when did you become a buyer's agent?
Obviously, I played professional football for some time, got delisted, which was always fun, but probably when I was about 21, 22. So I finished uni, did a finance economics degree, got a job with one of the big four, and I was trying to go down the financial planning route and probably just didn't enjoy it as much. I felt dry and mundane doing it. Not that there's anything against that. And then it was just a really random conversation that I had with one of my good friends, who is actually my business partner as well at the now. He said, look, we've got this Melbourne model that are coming over. He knew them from his sister was best friends, and they just came over and started having a conversation, talking about the market, the property. And this was back in like 2016, I think. Yeah. And so you're going, oh yeah, like a buyer's agent, it's pretty foreign. What does that mean? What does that entail? And then the conversations become a bit more probably elaborate, and I was like, oh, this actually sounds like something that I'd really enjoy. Like, I'm good at talking to people. I understand property. I've done the finance. Like, you're still looking after their best interests. Yeah. And it really started to pick up. But in 2016, like no one at the moment probably has any idea what buyers agents are. Like imagine 8 years ago when I started, and then that just kind of took off from there.
It's quite a hot topic, buyers agents at the moment. It seems like it's a much easier pathway into being a buyer's agent now. Oh, it probably was then, but now it's quite easy to spruik good numbers because of what happens in the property market.
Correct.
And so there must be an element of going, well, I'm a professional. You're a true professional in that space, and there's obviously a lot of imitators. How do you separate yourself from that?
I think it's just like knowledge and experience, because I always talk like boots on the ground. Like if I know if I'm doing my job right, I know everything that's occurring in my market. And so like...
That is true. Based on any text message or anything that we've had between each other over the last couple of weeks, I'll say, hey, Ron, this is what one of my clients is looking at. And you go, yeah, I know that. I know that property. I know this one. You go, oh, you really do know stuff.
And that's a part of like my business model is like market specialisation. So like for you to enter the markets that I buy in, if you're someone that's competing with me, you need to know everything from the past 8 years about how the different cycles occur, why some people prefer pockets of Floreat versus other pockets of Floreat. Like little things that go a long way. Which one's a thoroughfare? Which one do you cut through? Which street do you cut through to skip traffic? Like little things that separate you from like someone else is just trying to enter.
I would never have thought of those things either.
Yeah. Or like little things like natural light. Which way is the sun set on your property? Do you want your pool in the east or the west? Like things, do you like prefer swimming in the morning, the afternoon? Like all these little things that you pick up over time. And then if you have a new entrant, and like it's good that it's getting more exposure, but I think for people that are entering it's really making sure you know your stuff, because if it goes wrong, it goes drastically wrong. And if you're just a one-man band, it's really difficult to kind of operate in that sense. And I think that's a really important part, is if you're going to use a buyer's agent, they need to know the market better than you know it. And I think that's probably going to be a problem going forward if we have too many. You might have a flash in the pan where someone could buy in Craigie and then they could be buying in Freo, whereas they probably don't have the relationships or the understanding of each market. So you're probably better off doing it yourself in some senses.
And that's what people ask me when they go, should I use a buyer's agent? And that was one of the reasons why I reached out to you initially, was that I feel there's definitely a place for buyer's agents. There absolutely is. I think you offer such an amazing service. And then there's also that element of, why can't I just do it myself? And the answer is, well, you can.
Yeah.
And so it's just not a need for everybody, because people can do it themselves, but you clearly are needed from a part of the market.
Yeah, 100%. And sometimes it's like I actually encourage people to try and do it themselves, because I find that early on, if I sign up a client and they haven't been looking for long enough, they might, not that they don't believe you, but you almost need to go through a little bit of hurt and a little bit of pain, and then understand that, okay, I can't do this myself. And you go, here's the solution for you. Because if I provide you the solution too early on, you might not appreciate it. And that goes for any client. Like a lot of the questions I get is like, how long does it take you to purchase property? And I said, I could buy a property for you today if you're like, depending on what you're looking for. Yeah. Or it could take you 6 months. So it's really just trying to, understand that and go, look, you can do it yourself, but would you rather have someone that's tried and tested? It's like going to the bank or to a broker. Exact same conversation. Everyone can walk into a bank, but they might not get you the best rate or the best thing that suits you. And that's something that's really important. It's exactly the same as a buyer's agent. Like it might be nice being able to, the amount of times you've got a gridlock on a property between the husband and the wife, and you're trying to be like, what do you think, Rowan? And you're non-biased, and you're being your honest approach, and you go, I actually think you can do better because of this, this, and this. And a lot of people don't see that. They might see what comes up on realestate.com. Yeah. And that's it. And they're like, this is the one property, it's the only thing we can buy. And I go, well, actually, if you look a little bit further out and you broaden your horizons, there are other things out there. You just don't know about them.
Yeah, having thought about it this way, or yeah.
So that's really important.
What I guess if we're talking about the property market, it's right on the tip of most people's tongues at the moment. And there's certainly an element of when the taxi drivers are talking about an investment, you're probably a bit too late. What are your, as an overall, what are you seeing in the market at the moment, and where do you see it heading?
I see a lot of fatigue, buyer fatigue in particular.
That's a really good point.
So I think at the moment, if I look at the stats, we've got about 5,000 properties on the market.
Yeah, I think it ticked over 5.5.
Yeah, so if we're going off that, and obviously the previous study, I think we're in the 3,000s. Obviously we're getting more stock, but buyers have almost had enough, I think, at this for the year. And they almost need a bit of reprieve over Christmas, because it's probably the only time you really get to sit down and spend time with one another and actually have a genuine conversation and be like, what are we doing? Obviously, there's the talks of rate cuts, interest rates, cost of living. There's all these factors that are going on. Then you're going to throw in, we've got notoriously low stock, like the lowest we've ever had since 1980, since we started recording.
Is that low? Yeah, wow.
Obviously, we've had a bit of an upkick in potential listings. But that might just be maybe some investors exiting the market, whether they're from Melbourne or Sydney, because they've bought in 2017, 2018. They've had their nearly 200% growth at some stages. So then they've capped out and they're starting to sell. But even in the market at the moment, there's a lot of inferior product. So buyers are more picky, they're fatigued. So if there's a property on a slightly busy road and it's something wrong with it, no one's jumping all over it. It's harder to sell. And I think that will change in the next few months. I think people just need a bit of reprieve and a bit more, because the market, you can go through all the economics in the world, but sometimes it's all about confidence and emotion, because that's one of the biggest factors when you're buying a home. If you're not emotionally invested, you're never going to buy something. And I think every initial consult I'm having with a client or a new potential lead, everyone's like I'm just exhausted. I've had put 8 offers in, and you just like, sometimes it could be the ninth that like you can buy the property, but sometimes they just need to reset, realign, because that's when people start making mistakes as well.
Yeah. Well, you classic. It's you buy on emotion and you justify with logic. And
Correct.
You're in that logical mindset. When they're buying on the emotion, you're kind of there as their confidant in that space. What do you see 2025 holding for the property market?
I reckon it'll be pretty bullish. I actually think there's still growth left in the market. Even just like the amount we earn compared to every other state, stock. But it's just confidence as well. If you open up the paper today, it's about saying it's going to go up by 15 to 19%, and that's going to spruik it again, and it's noise and it's further noise. And I don't see it coming down anytime soon in that regard. But I think because we are getting closer and closer to probably that, where it probably taps out in some respect, I think you need to be really confident in your strategy, because if you're leaving it to the last minute and you're at the peak, potentially that's where mistakes can happen. If you're not understanding where value is within the market, I think that's the biggest one. And just knowing you're buying a good asset or a good product, and you're going back to the fundamentals of what makes up a good product, and you go through it all, and as long as you're ticking those boxes, if you're holding it for 10, 20, 30 years, you're going to go through 3 growth phases in that time and 3 dips in the market, because Perth's notorious for having a stagnation period. Yeah. So as long as you're still ticking those boxes, everything's going to be fine, but it's just that outside noise to try and remove yourself from.
It's really funny that it almost feels like an echo chamber sometimes when we catch up, because what you're saying is exactly the same thing that I convey to clients, where everyone wants to know when's the right time to buy. Yep. Everyone really wants to know it. And from my perspective, if the numbers make sense and you're comfortable with the repayments and the financial aspect to it, and you find the right property that ticks the boxes, then it's the right time.
Correct.
And you're never going to time the market, because you only know it's at the peak when it's already coming down.
Correct.
And you only know it's at the bottom when it's already coming back up. So it is just noise.
Yeah, and it depends what you're trying to do. Is it investment or is it home buying? If it's a home buying, like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you're trying to time the market, you could buy a product really well, but you might not love it. Yeah. Therefore, like, you're going to sell in 2 years' time. Like, and it might not suit your needs. Whereas if it's investment, yeah, it's a different vehicle, and you really need to go through about the economics and the micro and macro in that respect, about why we're buying in Perth, when should you leave, when should you enter. Because when you're buying your home, like, it's just the fundamentals, like 4x2, do you, how many children do you have? Like, is it in the school zone you want to be in? Is it, how much work's required to it? What capacity do you have? All these questions that sometimes go out the window when people go through a home. Like, I think it was like 2 years ago, Domain released when the market was like really heaving in 2021.
Yeah.
That was 3 years ago. Geez, that's gone quick. The average buyer that spent over $1 million spent less than 13 minutes in the property.
Really?
Like, how ridiculous is that? And you think about, like, for me to buy a pair of shoes, it takes me longer than 13 minutes, and I'm only spending about $150.
Yeah.
So then you're spending over $1, $2, $3 million, and you're spending within 13 minutes.
That's amazing. That's a really good stat.
It is, and it's just like how much due diligence has gone into that 13 minutes. Like, imagine if you just spent a little bit longer, or you had the appropriate strategy to be like, okay, if I do have 30 minutes, I've already done my research, I've already done everything beforehand. So it's pretty mind blowing when you start to see it like that, and you see it in the market a lot of the time when things are heaving, like you're lining up. It's quicker to get a coffee down at Community in Subiaco than it is to get through a home open sometimes, whereas at the moment probably that sting's not quite there.
Yeah. And I guess one of the biggest issues I see clients having in the current market is that ability to upgrade, because that's generally the demographic that we're working within. And so when you've got the existing property and you're trying to get to the next one, what do you see in that space?
The upgrading's an interesting one because there is a lot of buyers in that same category. But in order for that to happen, you need that person you're buying from either to downsize or upgrade again. So you almost need a middleman, which is essentially what I've been doing to kind of open up the market a little bit more. Is like you go represent that seller in order for them to buy. You unlock, like you have a bit of a logjam. That's what's occurring in this market. There's a genuine logjam. So you need to facilitate, whether that's like speaking to yourself, like is it a bridging loan to sell yours to buy? Is it being as favourable as you can in a market where there are cash buyers, or they might be cash, but they're fake cash or they're fully unconditional. So you really need to be able to separate yourself and see what else is out there, because that's a very common buyer at the moment. Everyone wants to upgrade, and if there's one property, don't get me wrong, the market's still hot, and everyone will jump on that property and promote it to sell for nearly like 10% more than probably what they're asking. So because it might be the first time it's come up in 12 months. Like, that's just the way it is.
And what sort of advice would you give someone in that position?
Just be prepared. Like, understand that if there is a good property, there are still abundance of buyers willing to purchase it. I'm always understanding where value is as well. So like, you've got to have comparables, but in a market where there's a lack of stock and a lack of sales, it is really tough. So you've really got to draw upon probably market knowledge really quickly and understand like why things are selling. And like, even for example, it could be something that sells in Floreat, right, for 2.5, but all the buyers are at 2.2, 2.3, but there's one person that went above to 2.5. Where do you determine market value? Is it what someone's prepared to pay? But if that buyer's gone, everyone's at 2.3. So then you've really got to be adapting consistently and constantly about, okay, where is true market value, and having the conversation. So if I was representing someone and I'm like, look, the last time this house came up was 12 months ago, the market's moved by 30% in that time on a $2 million property, be prepared to pay the extra 10, 20% over the top, because the next time something like this comes up, it could be worth an extra 60%. And having that honest conversation.
Such ridiculous numbers.
It's such ridiculous numbers. But then, like, I think the amount of times that I catch up with people that have missed out on that property 12 months ago and they're kicking themselves, they didn't pay an extra 60 grand, kicking themselves. But it's within reason. Like, I'm not going to tell you to pay to purchase the property if I don't think it ticks the fundamentals.
Yeah, you're not talking about that for every property. It's very specific.
Yeah, and it's just about like giving as much information and your knowledge and expertise to the client to allow them to get to be comfortable in that position. Obviously understanding what the max budget is, what the circumstances are, because like, if you have an honest approach, you can't be like, okay, let's stretch to this number, but you know that there's a lot of stress involved with that. So there's no point of having that conversation, because yes, it's all well and good to get into the property, but you've also got to understand there's more things in life that occur around you. There's no point trying to buy it and stretching to the absolute limit and going through a divorce the next month, even though you might make money on your property. But look, it's a give and take a lot of the time.
Yeah, it certainly is. And what I'd love to delve into Verve.
Yep.
Talk to me. That's your baby, right? So,
Yeah.
And every time I mention Verve to you, you can see it in your eyes. You love it. And so, talk to me. How did Verve start? Where is it now? What's behind it?
So obviously we've been planning it for a little while. Where did it start? We wanted something obviously pretty catchy, like 4 or 5 letters, because I think at the moment anything that's being launched, it's nice, short, sharp, and crisp. Obviously we had a fair few names to go through. Obviously ChatGPT came into it a fair bit of time, which is always a good tool. But then it kind of just stuck. Obviously, like Verve means enthusiasm, and I think that's something that I preach in regards to the way I go about my work, and obviously with all my staff involved as well. But obviously you've got the Verve, the champagne as well, just something that like separates yourself. Like absolute professional is probably the way I associate with it, and it just probably has the brand. It just typifies probably what I stand for. And it was funny, as soon as I changed it from my previous company, the amount of positive feedback and comments that people gravitate towards it, because it's my business and people are appreciating that. It does go a long way.
Yeah.
And it's something that like you hold, as you know, like as soon as you went to Tusk, like people gravitate towards you more and appreciate that you've gone and taken this venture. It's not an easy thing to do. So look, it does. Like, I'm very proud of it, and I'm very proud of probably the team that we've got at the moment, because everyone like has really bought into it. Obviously, everyone came across with me, which is always a positive as well. But it's just, I think for me, the career that I've had so far, and it's only been like 8 years, and going through it, the joys you see someone else succeeding from something that you've created is something that can never be replicated, and I think that's why you go through the long hours and the torment at times, because there is a silver lining as well.
Yeah, there certainly is. And the one thing I'm fascinated about, especially in a really heavy sales environment, because that's generally what property is, how do you create a culture within a sales environment that people are wanting success for their peer whilst also trying to achieve their own success?
It's really hard, because in sales agencies they generally don't gel that well. So when, like, obviously separating into markets works really well for me, but it's creating an environment where everyone can be themselves, because I don't need 10 Rowan Powells. I don't want 10 Rowan Powells, because each person's an individual and each person brings something different to the table. And if I go, well, I've got different people in different areas, but they all have their strengths and their own different weaknesses, we become better as a collective, because there's ways that I probably don't think about things. And when we have our meetings, or even when I have my one-on-ones with my staff, I'm really pushing them to give me feedback, because I want to learn as much, because the way that I operate isn't the way that someone else operates.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to create that culture, and to be really understanding that when I think they would probably appreciate it more, because I have done the hard yards and I've seen everything. So when I do give advice, it's coming from, like, I have been here. Whereas sometimes I find if people in management positions actually haven't done anything, and they're trying to provide advice, and they probably don't listen as much. Whereas you're like, look, I've been in the trenches. I know what you're going through. Like, and you're your colleague, but you really do care about them. I think that's a really important part.
Yeah. And you can see how you care about it when you're talking about your team as well.
Yeah.
So who have you got? What's the background?
So we've got Sean Holton, so he does like Mount Lawley, inner city, and then we've got Boston Cable, who does like Wembley Downs through there. We've got Jane as well, who does like a bit of the western suburbs, Cottesloe. Yeah. And then we've got Lana, who does the North Beach through there. And then we've got Emily, which does all the post-transaction for us. And then we've got Lachlan, who's my business partner as well. And Zach, obviously, as well, doing the Freo South Pocket. And that's probably where we're probably going to sit at the moment, because, you really want to build good people. And sometimes I think a lot of people fall in the trap of, let's be the biggest and best. And sometimes it's like, no, let's build good people and grow internally. I think that took me a long not a long time to realize that, but sometimes when you take on too much, you burn out. And it's like, okay, how do I peel this back? How do I make sure that we're growing and everyone's happy and I'm happy? Because at the end of the day, that's why we do what we do.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to be going to bed stressed. You don't want to be overtired. You don't want to be grumpy. You want to be present when you're speaking to your team or present when you're with your clients. So it's just trying to get that perfect formula. And I don't think everyone's ever got it, but you're just always trying to strive to be that 1% better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess in your space, your skill set is there's plenty that makes up a buyer's agent and a really good buyer's agent. Negotiation, where do you see that in terms of, because I guess the reason I ask that is a lot of people, they struggle to negotiate with a real estate agent because they sometimes don't feel like they have the knowledge or the power in that relationship. And so when I envisage using a buyer's agent, one of the things that I would see beneficial is your ability to negotiate with a real estate agent because you know it and that's your skill set. How do you view that? How do you deal with that?
Well, everyone's got different ways of trying to negotiate. So for me, I'm a massive believer in being really patient and consistent. So I take not the emotion out of it, but there's always two sides. So you've always got to understand where things are coming from. And if you come in really bullish, people aren't going to work with you. We've got to make people want to work with you in that regard. So if you're back to what I've pretty much spoken about, being honest and you're doing everything you can, obviously not really you're not revealing all your cards that you've got, but it's about being okay, if there is a deal to be done here, how do we have this conversation to make sure that everyone, well, in particular, your client feels like they've had a win.
Yeah.
So then you're trying to have the conversation around that and you're trying to probably filter it to the buyer more than anything else because especially in the market they're in where it's a seller's dominant market, you've got to understand that the little win might be securing the property over someone else where you probably didn't deserve to secure that property. Yeah. And that happens. So it's just okay, because sometimes sellers, they can pick and choose who they want to sell to depending on how difficult they might potentially be as well. Yes, price is one thing, but sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. So when you're negotiating, it's really important to obviously have the best interest of your client, but also understand if there is a deal to be done, whether it's worth proceeding with, because you don't want to waste everyone's time. If you're okay, this is where I probably see it is, where do you see it? And then just being okay, I don't think we're on the same page, let's walk away.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a lot of buyers will fall into the trap of being we'll pay an extra 20, 30 grand. It's no, let's hold our horses, let's actually sit on it, take the emotion out and have a conversation about it. So I think that's a really important part. It's, just you're predictable to your client and you're just trying to represent their best interest. So it's a weird one to...
It is weird.
Each negotiation is different because each person wants some sort of win, and that's just in life. Everyone's like that as well. Everyone wants to have a real warm, fuzzy feeling at the end of it. But sometimes it can be a grind to get there.
And securing the property, as you said, could just be the perfect outcome, regardless of what's made up in that.
Correct. Yeah. And it might take some time for people to realise that as well.
Yeah.
But if you've done all your work prior and you've done all the due diligence, you've shown them other properties, you've done the valuation of where it sits for price, and then you can justify why you're buying it at that level, you've already done all the work beforehand. Yeah. And then so when you're negotiating, you're working back and you go, look, we've covered all this. We're confident in what we're trying to buy, and then that inspires confidence in them. They go I don't want to miss this property. And you're okay, I don't want to miss this property for this price. Let's make sure we're not overpaying. Let's make sure we're not falling head over heels. Is this tick everything that you want? So it's just reiterating what they've already told you, but giving them confidence in the process that you've created for them.
And feeling like you're caring for them through that. It's amazing when there's a lot of zeros in buying property, and it's amazing how you kind of can lose sight of what the reality is on those zeros and the tangible reality of it. And so, as you said, increasing 20 or 30K, you kind of do that quite flippantly when buying property, but you kind of, when you're going to the shops or something and you see a discount or a price point and you go, hang on a second, is it 20K, 30K?
And it's a great point because say, for example, I was to go to the shops and go buy a watermelon, right? and on the count it says it's $6, and I go scan it's $12. You feel gypped.
Absolutely.
You're like, I'm not buying it. And that's what's happening in the property market at the moment. Like, it's been advertised for 2 mil, offers from, and it sells for 2.4. And you're like, how does that work? Whereas everyone's mindset probably the years gone by is like, if it's for 2, we can buy it for 1.8, 1.9. There's a discount.
Yeah.
Whereas you got to change that mindset. And I think a lot of Perth buyers got blown away by East Coast coming in because they're so familiar with that model of like, okay, it's going to sell for 10, 20% over. I'll hedge my bets and go 10, and no one else is around the mark. And then you look back on it in 12 months, you're like, geez, they bought that really well.
Yeah.
Because you're like, it's like almost PTSD, like of what happened in 2014 or what happened in previous years where Perth crashed. People still hold that. And so when you're competing against these people that understand, and even like myself, where I'm like, well, I know that property is sold for 200 grand more, but no one else knows that.
Yeah.
And so when you go buy it for your client, you're like, well, let's be prepared. If you're more prepared than anybody else, that's what separates yourself as a better buyer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the looking back at previous markets, but also the ones that haven't been involved in a previous market.
Correct.
And so their only point of reference is current.
Yep.
And anyone that bought in the last 12 or 18 months is sitting back going, geez, I'm pretty good at this.
Yeah. Well, it's not anyone. Yeah, anyone that's probably bought from 2016. If you bought in 2016, 2017, you're probably flying and you're probably upgrading.
Yeah.
So then everyone, that's understanding why they bought well. Like some people could even buy on a main road, right, in 2017, and the house could double. Whereas if you were to buy that now, and you're like, I wouldn't obviously first and foremost ever advise to buy on a main road. But would you get that resale or that growth compared to what you've done? Probably not. It's like investing. Like you get lucky a few times or anything like that. When it's like, but we're not talking a few $1,000s. We're talking millions of dollars, which makes it even more important to make sure it's not just off a whim. It's like, okay, I'm educated in what I'm doing.
You've got the professional team behind you.
Correct.
Probably the last place I wanted to kind of go was you talk about Verve, and as I said, you get quite excited. What are you most proud of in either the business itself, you as an individual, or you as the buyer's agent? What's something you're proud of? A couple of things.
I think it's a good question because a lot of the time you're probably so in it all the time, you probably never have a chance to really reflect. I did a bit of reflection before coming here, actually. I think the biggest thing is like just growing a team in the space of probably 12 to 24 months, because there used to be just me and a couple others, or me in particular. And that's probably the team, is to see them grow in particular. That's probably something I'm really proud of. Personally, probably having to juggle everything that occurs to running a business, owning it, being probably the number one revenue generator as well. So obviously bringing in the clients, doing the deals, and still being present to give feedback and advice. If I probably had to think about that probably 2 years ago, I probably wasn't in the headspace to be able to do that because you're so fixated on yourself, and being able to have that to kind of look upon and be like, okay, the business is growing, we're becoming bigger, we're probably, people are knowing what we're doing more often, and I haven't even had to do the marketing or anything like that. It's more word of mouth that shows that it's a really strong brand and probably strong of what I do. Because I always get the reputation I'm the guy that works behind the scenes and no one really knows about, but he's the one that's buying the property. Whereas now it's like, okay, I'm bringing everyone to the forefront, and we're celebrating as a team, not just my own individual accolades or achievements, and obviously being a little bit humble about that. But I think, just for a buyer's agent, I think for me, it's probably raising more awareness in the market that we're in, and I think probably the journey that I've taken, I think I should be pretty proud of that.
So from the kid that got delisted to where you are now, how do you feel about that journey?
Look, I probably wouldn't change anything for the world. Like, I love what I do. Yeah. And it's different. It's probably, when I was playing football, I was very much in a bubble and everything's kind of done for you, whereas I've had to go out and do everything myself. Haven't really had too many people to rely on to do it. Obviously, I've had my partner and business partners and stuff like that, but it can be a pretty lonely journey to do it. And you not that you fight a few demons, but you're constantly trying to figure out what works and what doesn't, and it could take you months, years to figure out something that's probably not working. and then you've got to try and backtrack and like, what did I learn from it? And it's always about trying to learn. And I think if I've never gone down this path, I probably wouldn't be as mature as I am today.
Yeah.
And probably understand what I like and don't like and what makes me tick. I think I thought I did, but now I'm like, well and truly in the trenches. I know, and you're looking at yourself most of the time because you're the first and foremost that people need to look to.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge factor.
It's great chat. Absolute pleasure having you on, but it's a pleasure having only met you a couple of months ago, and it's funny because our lives and paths have crossed multiple times without even realising it at the time.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming on. I'm sure people will enjoy this one.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Thank you so much for listening and being a part of our community at That Backyard Property Podcast. We would love it if you could like, comment, or even share with a family member or a friend that might get something useful from today's episode. We can't wait to see you again next Tuesday.